be what? Radically different from the present heavens and the present earth, correct? And we hope that it's radically different. We want sin to be dealt with ultimately and finally, and the sin nature, etc. That fourth cosmos, that fourth world, is radically different, and we want it to be, than the present world in which we live in. The present world in which we live in was radically different from the world before the flood, and even the world before the fall is radically different from the world after the fall and before the flood. So how can we, in the 21st century, project back with the physics that we have today, with the geophysics, with the geology, etc., before the flood, before the fall, and try to understand that took place in the week of creation? Well, there's a new heavens, new earth that is glorious. This is after the judgment and destruction. So what the point being here is uniformitarianism fails. It's not a good theory. It's not a good basis. And in fact, all theories fail. So we have to hold everything tentative. We are utterly dependent upon what? Revelation. We're utterly dependent on the one that was there when the foundations of the world were formed. So we're utterly dependent upon what God has revealed in His Word. Just as we are radically and utterly dependent upon what God tells us concerning the new heavens and the new earth, and He tells us a little bit about them, and we come to some conclusions concerning them, we have to, in the same way, depend on what He's told us concerning creation week. So we can come up with ideas and theories, but we want to hold them tentative. And certainly the evolutionist, and by the way, Hugh Ross, when he writes, oh, such and such conditions existed 5 billion years, 2 billion years ago, or 10,000 years, or 100,000 years ago. He writes almost as if he was there recording and observing all of those things. No way. What he's doing is he's projecting back based on 21st century assumptions. And the exegetical details of the text, did you catch that? That was kind of quick. Go against it. In other words, what God has revealed on creation day 4 is very different than the evolutionary interpretation of the past. First of all, verse 14, God created by divine fiat. We have no concept of what that means other than understanding that God spoke, things came about. We have no idea what the physics behind that is. And we're in no position to even evaluate it. God just spoke, came about. We have the immediacy of fulfillment that I talked about. And it was so. He spoke, it happened. How can that be? All processes that we look at in the 21st century require time. And some of them take what seems like long periods of time. Well, the physics was totally different. Creation week. The creation terms in verse 16. God made asa. That's a creative word. And by the way, Hugh Ross does very, very poor exegetical work on day 4. In fact, it's embarrassing what he does, if not deceptive. He says that on day 4, the heavenly bodies appear, and the earth had this cloud or this opaque condition where the light did not transmit to the earth, and now it appears. That word does not occur in verses 14 through 19. The word appear, if you look at the Genesis account, if you go back to Genesis, it does occur in verse 9. Moses used the very word that Hugh Ross implies is in, he implies that it's in verses 14 through 19, and it's not. Moses does use it, but not in this passage. Okay? He uses the word that has the idea of appearing or seeing, and in the particular Hebrew form, it's translated to appear. There's nothing appearing here. It's all fiat creation. So you have that in verse 16, and you have it in 15, you have it in 16. And then you have the emphasis, it's almost repeated. You have the placement in verse 17. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth in the context of day 4. So there's nothing in the text that indicates that these appeared. Now, the framework hypotheses that I spoke of also in our last talk on Genesis, they see the writer recapitulating what took place on day 1. So this is a major problem to try to harmonize the Bible and any evolutionary theory because it's totally out of sequence. That's why I gave you that first little portion on the out of sequence things. This is probably the biggest issue out of sequence in terms of the time frame. So you have to do some sort of gymnastics to try to harmonize this. So virtually all accommodating views take the evolutionary stand and somehow rearrange the text in order to fit into that idea. Framework hypotheses, theistic evolution, progressive creationism, this is all the approach that they use. Okay? So uniformitarianism fails. And by the way, that fails concerning any issue that you deal with before the Genesis flood. Anything before the fall, we can't be certain about anything. The physics of today just doesn't work back then. It's different. It's a different physics. So the exegetical details don't fit. The motive seems to be to somehow accommodate or somehow harmonize present-day theory or evolutionary ideas with the biblical text. And it's better just to stick with what God revealed. That's the best data that we have. And by the way, documentary evidence is the best evidence for historical issues in general. Eyewitness accounts. That is recorded for us. And that's what we have. We have a record. Now, Moses wasn't there, but Moses received the revelation. So we looked at creation and purpose, 14 through 16. Now, we have the placement, and I'm going to go over this quickly because I want to get to the last part on your outline sheet, the significance of the celestial bodies, 17 through 19. We have the location in verse 17. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens, and now to give light for illumination. So we have purpose. And then verse 18, to govern the day and the night. So it sets the parameters for time. And then the separation part to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Similar to 131 where he pronounces it very good. He's saying the physics at this time, this good environment is different from after the fall. It's very good. That's his assessment. God saw that it was very good. This is the divine assessment. And then there was the chronology in verse 19. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So that's day 4 of the creative week. Let's take a step back and take a look at the significance of all of this and go beyond the Genesis account. And there's several things I want to say here, and I'm running out of time, but how much time do we have? 10 minutes? 2 hours? Good. First of all, there are several passages that give us a biblical description of what God did. So there's several things to note here. And this is all primarily outside that reinforces what Genesis 1 says. Creation by His Word, that's not just Genesis 1. And God said, and it came about, that's what it says in Genesis 1. But there's other passages. The key passage there is Psalm 33, 6 through 9. By the word of the Lord, now this is written much longer after Moses. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. So God's speaking His word, and by the breath of His mouth, all their hosts. In other words, everything in the heavens, all of the stars that in Genesis are incidental. He spoke them into being. Skip down to verse 9. For he spoke, and it was done. There's the immediacy of fulfillment by the psalmist. He commanded, and it stood fast. There's the fiat, the commandment. Creation by his word. And there's passages that even speak of this unimaginable vastness out there. Even though in the time of Moses, in fact in New Testament time, what men could just see with the naked eye was impressive enough, and what we can see in the 21st century with the optical equipment that we have, not only telescopes, we should be impressed. We should fall down on our knees and worship the one that just, oh, by the way, I made the stars. The one that did that. Unimaginable vastness. Let me give you a couple of passages here. Jeremiah 31:37. Thus says the Lord, if the heavens above can be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out below. In other words, if we have the capability to scientifically even measure, the implication is that we don't have that capability, and certainly in the time of Jeremiah there was not that capability, but even in our time there's not the capability to measure the universe or the heavens. If the heavens above can be measured, the implication is they cannot, and the foundations of the earth searched out below, then I will also cast off all the offspring of Israel for all that they have done, declares the Lord. Now, is God going to cast off Israel? No. And he's saying that I'm going to stick with Israel, and I am so committed to that even if you were capable of measuring, and you're not, if you were capable, then I could conceivably cast them away. But since we cannot, God's not going to cast Israel away. Isaiah 55:9 kind of hints at this vastness, and there's other passages, by the way. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, in other words, so vast, billions of light years, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Implication of the vastness. That should have special meaning to us, even more so than in Isaiah's day.